Welcome. We will get started in just a few minutes.
Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy, clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Give me all you got, don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, 'cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. 'Cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, 'cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel
Started in just a minute.
because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Hey, hey, hey. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Khadija Williams, the Senior Manager of Family and Community Engagement at Rocket Ship, and I have here candidate for Ward 5, Dr. Faith Gibson Hubbard, who is running for Ward 5 Council. As you may know, community conversations are to enable the community to get a deep dive into candidates running for office. And we are so happy to have you here with us today, Faith. Thank you so much. I would love for you to take some time to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think you can see a cameo in the background. My daughter just walked by. My children just made it home. So one of the most important things that you'll probably know about me is that while my name is Faith Gibson Hubbard, and I am honored to be running for the Ward 5 Council seat here in my beloved home in Ward 5, I am the mom of two, Emerson and Colton, and they just got home from school. And so they might make a cameo appearance or two, because this is also their hour where they show up. But as I mentioned before, I feel so honored to have the opportunity to run for the Ward 5 Council seat, and I am doing so because I believe in the power of community. 12 years ago, my husband and I decided to start our family. And while we were living in Columbia Heights, when we got ready to start our family, we wanted to be in a place where we could feel a sense of belonging, see reflections of ourselves, and raise our now children that you will probably see coming in and out of the screen with community members who had similar community values. And we found all of that here in Ward 5. And so I have been really honored to be able to live in this community and build my family here, but I've also been really honored to start my community work also in Ward 5. So soon after we moved to the Ward 5 community, I used to be a middle school teacher. I taught 7th, 8th grade language arts, and community for me has always been a true through line of my life. And so moving into the community, I knew I wanted to get involved. I saw email on the community listservs about needing middle schools in Ward 5, and I immediately got involved with our Ward 5 Council on Education and really loved that work. Was able to do advocacy with my neighbors at that time around making sure that we could have the middle schools that have now been open, both Brookland and McKinley Middle School. And that also led me even deeper into government service, where Khadijah, you and I worked together when I established the Office of the Student Advocate in 2015. I was appointed by the State Board of Education to be the first Chief Student Advocate and establish that office in order to help families navigate the complexities of public education. And I'm sure anyone who's on here today has probably had to deal with that, as I have. How do you handle issues of special education? How do you handle, as a school, family engagement, and so much more? And so I was really honored to do that work with Khadijah and write these reports that weren't just about actions that the state board should take, but also what should we be thinking about as a city in order to make education truly focused on families and our youngest district residents. I also had the pleasure of being the interim ombudsman for public education and helping families mediate complaints and concerns with their schools. And I raised my own hand because I had to use those services for my own son as he was trying to navigate special education supports at his school. And then I had the opportunity to come over to our current mayor's administration, and establish Thrive by 5 DC. And that work was so important to me because as a mom, I had experienced true trauma in pregnancy when I almost died in childbirth with my daughter, and seeing firsthand the issues around maternal and infant health in our city, and being able to make sure that that conversation could be led by those most impacted, our communities, through the National Maternal and Infant Health Summit, and focusing on where we know we need to make more progress, which is in early learning and development, not only and making sure that teachers are making a true livable wage because they're doing a great job, but that the access points for families are important. And then before I decided to run for the Ward 5 council seat, I also was the director of the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Knocking on families' doors, doing rent support through Stay DC, groceries, vaccinations, making sure that people had the supports that they needed through these 13 community affairs offices. And that was really rewarding work at a very challenging time. But Ward 5 is my love, and this is my forever home. And so while I do love Ward 5, I know that we have a tremendous amount of things that we need to continue to work on here in order to make this the community that we all deserve. Issues of housing affordability. I'm sitting in a house that my husband and I bought 12 years ago for in the 300,000s, and now there are $1 million homes in our community. Who's buying those homes? Who's living in our community now? Who can stay? That is an issue. Transportation is an issue, making sure that we can get around the city in true, meaningful ways. Some people need to drive. Many people would like to have meaningful, satisfying lives where they could get on public transportation and feel safe in that. Public safety is an issue. I know I hear more gunshots now than I had in a really long time, and there's a reason for that. Where have we missed important investments that our communities deserve? Do people now feel like this community is not for them? How can we solve for that while making sure that we are all safe? How can our streets be safe so that if I want to cross the street, I'm not going to get hit by a car because they're not really looking for me? Environmental justice is an issue that we have to tackle because many of our communities, especially here in Ward 5, we have industrial land. Black communities are often plagued with issues around environmental justice that we have to overcome, and so many other things. And so for me, my through line has been community, but also in coalition building, that no problems can be solved by one person, but together we can do that. And so again, I am running because I believe in the power of our community. I believe in the expertise that we have in our community. And I know that an almost $19 billion budget should be something that every single neighbor should be able to feel in real, tangible ways. And so while I am always willing to fight for that, I'm willing to fight in a different way this time in running for the council and being a legislator, because we need someone who understands our community, not only in practice, but in my everyday life. And so that is why I'm running for the Ward 5 Council seat, and just really excited to be here with you, Khadijah, and this great conversation.
Thank you so much, Faith. I especially appreciate the wealth of experience that you bring, and that even after working with me when I was in my 20s, you still put up with me, which is great.
I still like you. Isn't that great?
I know, it is. And I would love, Mr. Perry, for you to introduce yourself to the interwebs.
Good evening. My name is Scott Perry. I am the Partner and Development Director with the Edgewood Brookland Family Support Collaborative, which is headquartered in the Edgewood neighborhood.
Thank you. It was really important that we invite community organizations to also participate in the conversation, since they support our families on the ground. So my first question for you, Faith, is what aspects of Ward 5 do you represent? Who do you represent?
Who do I represent? Well, first, I would say I represent myself and my family. That's who I know best. But I also think that I occupy a really unique space in that I moved into the Woodridge community where people have lived for a really, really long time. And I remember when we first rolled up, my husband and I decided to buy this house before we were married. And my neighbor, Miss Atkins, came over. She was excited to meet us. And she said, "So how long have you all been married?" And I said, "Well, we're not married." And she looked at me and she said, "You're better than that. I'm going to come back and check and make sure that you get married." And Miss Atkins and Miss Love and Miss Francis and all the other families who have lived here in our neighborhood make it possible for us to raise our family. So I identify very strongly with people who have been here for a really long time, Native Washingtonians who are the foundation of our community. And I also know that there has not always been the focus on making sure that preserving those neighbors being able to stay here has been a focus. So I feel really connected with that. But also I know that I am someone who is still newer to the community. And I can also identify with newer families who are, coming into a community, getting ingrained and connected to the fabric of the community. Even over a decade being in Ward 5, I still feel that way. I'm still learning, being connected to people who have been here, and understanding the context of the community and honoring that. But I can also feel connected to new neighbors who are coming as well. Young children, navigating public education, professional challenges, and also seeing the way that our community continues to evolve. But I believe that when you are in the roles that I've been in, you have to work really hard to see yourselves in the narratives of everyone around you, and be able to connect and let your work be guided by those lived experiences. And so I do that even in my personal life as I live in this community with Miss Francis and Miss Love and Miss Atkins, but also with Jay and Isabel, who just moved in a few years ago across the street from me, and also other neighbors who have just moved in the Ward 5 community as well. And so that's why I feel really connected as well to making sure this is a community that we can all feel reflected in, is really important to me.
Thank you. And as you talked about earlier, you have served in a lot of different community roles. Like you've been very, very embedded in the community in a variety of positions. What is it about the council role that interests you, and what do you feel that the council role would enable you to do that you're not currently able to do in your current community engagement roles that you've held and you are involved in?
Yeah. So in the roles that I've held previously, it's generally either been in pushing for change through policy or implementing that policy and also making tweaks. And I think that's actually what makes me a really unique candidate in this space, is that I can say that I am the only one who's had that type of diverse experience, right? Like being the community advocate in a grassroots way, coming and saying, look, This is what we need if it's middle schools or if it's issues around safe passage, which was another area, or community safety. I've been able to do that. I've also been able to have work where, I am also proposing policy and then seeing where that goes in the Office of the Student Advocate and highlighting issues in the Office of the Ombudsman that were coming up that we should be addressing. Same with Thrive by Five, but also in implementing that and knowing how the budget works, which you do need the budget to be leveraged and to work in order to see that these things actually happen. I think that what's important to me right now about the council is that we do need people on the council who not only have a passion for service, but also that knows how government works so that we can leverage it to the best ability for our community. Sometimes there are things, in my opinion, that are passed, and I'm like, well, who is that really representative of? And how's that going to work? Who was asked about this particular piece of legislation happening, and how are we going to pay for that? And how will people know what that's supposed to mean to them and their lives? So a council member is not only a legislator, but it's also someone who is a representative of their community. And that means bringing what is happening in government to the community and making sure that the community also is a part of the government. And so this role is really important to me because of that. I think what we have missed in our current structure is making sure that community is actually leading what we are doing and guiding what we are doing. And so while I have for quite some time been in other roles and really been satisfied in those roles, also know that as a resident of Ward 5, I want to make sure that I can feel truly the impact, that I feel connected to, all these things. If we're going to be dealing with public safety, who's letting me know that there are violence interrupters in my community? And that I should be connected with those violence interrupters, or who's letting me know about the workforce opportunities that are available, who's making sure that our community-based organizations are being lifted up and connected in the ways that they should be connected. And a council member should be doing that as well. And I feel really blessed that I've had the opportunity to do that in other roles, and I believe that I can bring it to this Ward 5 council seat.
Thank you. And now I want to pass it to Mr. Perry to ask any questions that you have.
All right, thank you. Earlier you mentioned transportation as one of your, priorities. Can you elaborate a little bit on what your vision of transportation, either across the city or in Ward 5 in particular, looks like? What do you want to tackle?
So two things I would say specifically, and one is around street safety. Right. So making sure that you can walk around our community safely, that not only do you have to worry about community violence and like the increase that we've had in community violence, but also I would say that there's been a lot of traffic violence too, in violations just around, there's an influx of cars coming into our neighborhood and the infrastructure is not prepared for that. So we have Vision Zero. It's not about the lack of plans, right? It's around the funding of plans and the connecting that to communities so that we can get stuff done. We shouldn't have to say, why do they have four-way stops over in Georgetown at their intersections, but we can't get that? Why do we only have to focus on raised crosswalks around schools or libraries? We know that there are other places where they need to be. So it's talking to communities about just literally the infrastructure that we have within our community, which is old. We are an old city. And the way that I live off of Rhode Island Avenue, the way that Rhode Island Avenue was probably utilized long ago is very different than the highway it can feel like sometimes. And if we want true economic development too, you have to have good infrastructure that's going to be appealing to that. Also, if you want good economic development and you want people to feel connected to the place that we call home, you have to have transportation that is equitable. Again, I live in Woodridge. Bus service is not always reliable here. There's also not a train stop here. And even if it was, it's expensive. Sometimes people opt to drive because it's cheaper. Well, not with gas prices currently, but it could be cheaper or safer, right? I'll never forget being attacked on the metro by someone who was dealing with some mental health issues, but there was no one there to stop this person. So we need to focus on not only just transportation equity, making sure that, people can walk outside their door and access various different types of transportation, but definitely our public transit system. So to take the bus and know you can get on the bus and get to your job in a reasonable amount of time, get to pick up your child in a reasonable amount of time. So we would have to increase that. And I think we have to just say, in a lot of our communities that have been mostly Black and brown, right, that we haven't always had the best services. And so we don't take them because we don't feel safe. So I think we also have to tackle that as well, around saying, how can we be truly a multimodal community where people, if they want to bike, they can. If they want to get on the bus, maybe there needs to be a bus lane for that. But what does that also mean for some of our senior neighbors who need more innovative types of transportation? Maybe a bus is not going to work for them. Maybe they do need to park. How are we going to balance that also with adding in additional types of transportation? So it's thinking holistically in that way about the safety and about how we want communities to feel connected. Because again, where I live in Woodridge, if you don't have a car, or if you don't have time, to wait, you're not going to necessarily get to where you need to go in the right amount of time. So it's about tackling the inequities in transportation through the plans that we already have on the books. So it's holding people accountable to do those plans and making sure that the funds are not just showing up downtown, but that they are also showing up in our community right here in Ward 5.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So now for one of my weird questions. What is a trait of yours that your supporters would say is your strength, but people who are like, I don't know, haters, whatever, would say is not a strength?
I've had a variety of experience, and I always believe in continuing to keep a bridge, even when there's disagreement, right? Because I think you never know when you're going to need that bridge. Not just for yourself, but for other people that you're working with. So I would say that some people might say that experience isn't a strength, but I would say that we've seen when people are inexperienced, and we have 4 years of that in the White House, when people are inexperienced, when they don't know what they're doing, we see the result. So I think that my experience is really a strength. Also think the fact that I love talking to people. I love being connected. During COVID, I hated that I couldn't hug people. I hated that I couldn't be in the community. And I know when I'm knocking on doors and my other volunteers or my campaign team is out with me, they're always like, Faith, how much longer can you talk to this person? I want to be connected to people. I don't want to just count like 2 seconds at this door and then jump to the next door. If I'm talking to Ms. Johnson and she has something to say, I want Ms. Johnson to feel like she can finish what it is that she needs to say, because so many people haven't been heard. So the empathy and time that I'm willing to take with people, and make sure that people can truly understand the things that are impacting them, is something that other people take for granted or may see as a form of weakness, but it is not. It is really a form of strength to be able to transfer over to someone else, the ability to let them, yes, I'm running, but this leadership is about us. It's not just about me. And so I think those are traits that are really important: experience, and then being connected to people and empathy, because I think we have lost that. And women do that really well. And we've never had a woman as a council member in Ward 5. So I would say that's a pretty good plug for maybe a reason why. But being connected in that way is really important, because that's what people need: connection and leadership that they can believe in, that they also feel like they are a part of.
I appreciate that. And now I'm going to ask hard question as well. So one of the other candidates, we won't name who, has expressed that you are tied to corporate interests because of your relationship with the mayor. Can you talk about your relationship with the mayor, what you've done in the mayor's office, and whether the candidate's assertion is fair or unfair?
So, of course, I would say it is unfair. And that's because when someone doesn't have a particular type of access themselves, they always want to try to throw bombs as if it's something that's not good. And I think when you don't have your own experience, then you often try to deflect onto someone else. So I would say you probably should look deeper at that particular candidate and what they lack, and why they're throwing that bomb. I have gotten into every role that I have had because of the work that I'm doing and the value that people have seen that I could bring to the work. My very first appointment to anything in government was actually from Mayor Vincent Gray. he appointed me to the Library Board of Trustees to represent Ward 5. And that was a really amazing experience for me to see our libraries completely reimagined and redone beyond just books. My second appointment in government was actually from the State Board of Education. So all unanimously, all the state board members appointed me to be the first chief student advocate. And even our current state board member reappointed me to that role. So that was my second appointment. And then my appointment to Thrive by 5 was through Mayor Muriel Bowser, but that was because of the work that she saw me doing, not only as mayor, but when I met her when she was council member at the Lamont Riggs Library, and I was telling her that her focus on public education was wrong. And I think that sometimes we have to have these types of interactions and have people who can be inside of systems to disrupt and also speak truth to power of what communities are saying. That's important. We all do our jobs because, hopefully we are hired because we're doing a good job, right? And I have done a great job at many things. And that is because I've been in community and with community. So I would say, let my record speak for who I am. And I have a long record of who I am, unlike the person who was throwing the bomb. And so instead of focusing there, it's around what value would my experience bring to this seat in a way that no one else can. And it's the fact that I understand government both inside and out. It is the fact that I have the desire every day to learn something new about our community because we continue to change. And it's about the fact that this is not about me and that I've been doing the work even when the spotlight wasn't on me, not for just 2 years and not completing a term of something else before I'm asking for a new job, but that I have really done the work because our community deserves the work. And so I have evidence of that. I have receipts of that. I have relationships that come from that. And that is a powerful thing for us all, the same as many of our other community members have their own relationships that will be a great thing for how we together can move forward Ward 5. So I'll close the same way that I started, that if someone else is throwing bombs, I would take a deeper look at who they really are or what they lack. Because in this, as a mother, as a wife, as a professional, I don't have time to throw bombs. I have time to do work and to be invested in our community because that is what our community deserves.
Thank you. And now I'll ask one more question before I open it to Mr. Perry and to our attendees as well. We have several to ask questions. What does it mean, speaking of being a mother, what does it mean to be a mother running for this position?
I mean, my kids just came home and they want their attention too. But I think what it has meant for me to be a mother throughout this process is that my children are learning about their home too, right? And they see all the great possibilities and also the challenges that we have in our community and that they need to also be a part of the solution. My kids go door knocking with me. My son has helped me with phone banking. We set up at the McDonald's off of South Dakota Avenue, having fries because he wants to be able to hand out things, but he also loves McDonald's fries. But it is a challenge that, again, some of my other colleagues in this race, they don't have to overcome. There are a lot of, not only what does it mean to be a mother, but what does it mean to be a woman? I mean, women are judged very differently, in this space. How much are you smiling? Are you more aggressive? There are a lot of things that you have to think about that sometimes a man doesn't have to think about. But I can say I'm really grateful that I have a really wonderful partner in my husband. And that balance has been something that we've had to get to, but it's been really great. I mean, I'm able to do this because of the support, not only of my husband, but also our community who's willing to rally. But I am thankful to be able to show my children, in particular, my daughter, what is possible. That even when you are a mom, even when you have other things going on, that I can also reach for my dreams as well. And this is part of that reach, and they are with me in this process. So it means a lot to me.
Thank you. And now I will leave time for Mr. Perry and for attendees to ask questions.
In addition to transportation, you mentioned housing and I'm paraphrasing, the skyrocketing cost of home purchasing in DC. How would you address both home purchases or affordable home purchases as well as rental units for those who aren't looking to buy homes, who just want a nice, affordable apartment to live in. Because that is a constant concern, and has been a concern for several years for many residents in the city.
Yeah, I think as a city, we are on the right track. Like we have the right money, right, and the right mechanisms in place, but people aren't feeling it. So I would say, I think we need to revisit what people know about that process, right? And how should they feel? You know, when the mayor says $500 million in the Housing Production Trust Fund, you're like, wow, $500 million. What exactly should that look like? How should that show up in the community? And a lot of people don't understand how that works. It's confusing. So I think first we have to make sure that people know how they can be connected to those resources. And that is the job of a council member, right? Making sure that those resources clearly show up in the community and that people know for certain that that money is in action in the community, I think is the first thing, because there's a lot of things at play. But then I think going back to what you said, just with rentals, before we start talking about home ownership, is the one thing that has often been frustrating to me is that we have an area median income that takes into account the entire region, right? And it often drags up, what is actually, how much people are making in a way that's not representative of the district. And we know that many of our neighbors are forgotten in that, because we've been still continuing to fight for a higher living wage. We know that rents are often attached to this area median income, right? And who can afford what. So I do think we have to focus first on making sure that we know what truly is the income in the district, so that we can come up with right solutions to address either the workforce issue around what are the workforce and education opportunities that we need to continue to focus on to make sure people have a livable wage to rent. But also when it comes to rentals, I think we've also focused a lot on newer developments, and we haven't looked at our current community, and especially in some of our communities that are more densely populated, and say, oh, wow, this person has an accessory dwelling unit, or this person has a basement apartment. And how can we make sure that people can stay here by, again, working with everyday homeowners and landlords to actually make more affordable housing available through rentals? And I think we've missed a real opportunity there. Like when I go through Edgewood, when I go through Eckington, even some places in Brookland or over, in Trinidad, there are opportunities for that. And people don't see themselves as a part of the solution. And I think a part of our rental solution could reside there. I think also we have to stop just giving to developers the idea that if you do a little bit more, then, we'll be satisfied with that. It can't just be that you do a little bit more. It has to be that this is the requirement. This is our standard. And if you can't uphold that standard of what we need, then we don't need you here. And so I think that means making things a requirement and not just a suggestion. And right now, some of that is a suggestion around inclusionary zoning or around rent control. We need to expand these options. And I believe that there's a great way for us to be able to do that, to make sure that we can have more access within communities. And that means subsidizing some of our everyday neighbors to be able to make their housing options a possibility. And then when it comes to home ownership, we have to start really early, even with our young people, around what it means to build wealth, right? And to have financial literacy skills. And that means that we can be preparing our community much further out around home ownership, because it's not just about buying your house and getting the down payment. But the other day, something went wrong in my basement. You know who pays for that? I have to pay for that. And if you're not prepared for that, that could take you out. What are the other things that you need just beyond like the down payment assistance? And I think that we owe that to our neighbors to prepare them for something more. And I feel really excited about the opportunities that could be there around making sure that community-based organizations like yours and many others could be a part of that solution in getting people prepared for that. We also have to talk to our neighbors about the programs that we have around single family rehab, where they can actually continue to make sure their home is modernized in the ways that they need, whether they want to age in place or whether they want to hand off the property to another person in their family. I see so many of my neighbors selling their homes, and I'm like, don't go, because you'll never be able to come back. We have to talk about ways that they can keep houses within their families. And then also for people who have bought smaller properties and want to move to larger properties, like maybe you bought a condo, you could afford that first. We need next step programs that also prioritize second purchases for an affordable way for families to stay in our community. And I think that we can do that. $500 million in the Housing Protection Trust Fund, more money to come. Also other federal dollars that should be allow us to do that. And also adjusting some of the things that we already have, programs that we already have, to make it more attractive to people and allow them to take advantage, so that we're not pushing people out, but that we're finding ways to keep them closer in.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go. Hey, Faith.
Hi.
I've been part of this conversation. It just wasn't on video. So
I saw you.
yeah. So I'd like to shift to education. So during the pandemic, students experienced a rocky 2 years of learning due to remote learning. And even this year had a lot of quarantine closures. There are many students, especially students of color, who have experienced setbacks in achievement during the pandemic. As the former chief student advocate, and as a former teacher, and as a mom, what is your vision for how schools can enter into a recovery phase in order to better support students who are emerging from this crisis? And then finally, what is the role of a council member on the road to recovery in education?
Oh, that's a big one. And, Joanna, you and I used to tackle these issues together, and here you are now asking me the question. So I think the first thing that I would say is, as chief student advocate, and then even when you left me, and I had to take on both roles as ombudsman and chief student advocate, but even before that, we had talked about a lot of things that we knew were problems before we got to COVID. We knew the digital divide was a problem. We knew that the internet that some communities receive was not equal. I remember being on the library board of trustees, and we entered into a program where families could pick up hotspots and also devices. We saw families sitting outside of places that had Wi-Fi just so that they could do their kids' homework. We already knew that was a problem. I think what we need to do as a part of this recovery is be honest with ourselves that a lot of the problems that came up in COVID were not really new problems. They were just problems that we had never addressed. So I think the first start is for us to think about infrastructure, and not just like in some of the physical infrastructure that we can see, but also the things that are invisible, which is Wi-Fi, which are the needs of families within their homes. I think that can help us really be able to make this transition to kind of this, I hate new normal, but new normal of education, which is really interconnected, not just for kids, but also for families. We had a lot of adults, older people, who had to go to receive a lot of services or either connect to jobs on devices that they had never really had to utilize for that before. So I think we do need to still continue to think about, even with kids in school, what does it mean to be connected and to have access in equitable ways, because it's still not equitable. For me, as a mom, it was a hard time. But I can also say that it was the first time that I had ever felt as connected with my school, my son's school, and my daughter's school now, as a real partner in their education. One of the things we used to talk about, again, as chief student advocate, and when you were ombudsman, Joanna, that partner with families. I think schools are taking on a lot, and they always have, because I was guilty of this as a teacher. I said, just bring your kids. I know what I'm doing. And then I'll send them home in the evening. You can do a couple of pages of homework and it'll be good. That is not family partnership. We have to really be in partnership, because parents know what's happening at school, what's happening at home, and how that can be easily fixed in school. My son right now is dealing with issues around literacy. He's in the second grade. There was, while we have had tutors, while we have had, all the things, still nothing beats the type of instruction that he missed for that period of time. His teachers were great, in the virtual learning space, but still it was tough. We struggled all year long, again, because I think that when I was going to the teacher and I was like, how can I help? How can I help? He didn't seem to want to partner with me. And I think families have been asking us all this time, how can we help? Like, I want to come into the school. I want to be a partner. That's really important. And I think that's also part of the vision for education moving forward, is that education can't just be what happens in schools, but it's also what happens in communities. It's what's happened in workforce. For me, a new vision for education is for us to just connect all the dots that we've been working on individually. So early learning and development has to be connected to K through 12 education, has to be connected to workforce, has to be connected to college and career readiness. And we have to start exposing our children and families to our evolving economy of new jobs and experiences that we need to prepare them for. My 4-year-old, I ask her, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be when you grow up? And I want her to be exposed to that. But if we really think about education as a full continuum, from all the way from birth until, you go on to the afterlife, I think we would be much better off. Right now, it's very separate. And so for me, that vision would have to be a real continuum. Also, that vision has to be, Rocket Ship is a public charter school. My kids go to DCPS, but all families want the same thing. And they also want schools to work together. If I decided to send one of my kids to Rocket Ship, I would love to have the same calendar that my kid would have over at DCPS, right? I would love to know that I could get the same type of special education services for sure, wherever I go, right? And that schools will be working together in a coordinated way to make that happen, because I think that's what families expect. So one of the lessons I think we could take from COVID is to continue to work together, not just schools, but also government agencies to work together. As a council member, that is something that you can spark and you can push forward. And that is something that I will be working on. We don't need to duplicate services. We don't need to waste money doing something where if we just did it together, it would make more sense. We don't need to, have, again, like one issue's going over at Rocket Ship, and then down the street at Bunker Hill Elementary, we should be able to learn from each other, and for it to be connected. And as a council member, I think there's a really important role to play in education too, around lifting up our schools. And our schools is something that's a public good really for us all, and that this is public education, and the connectivity that families expect. But it has to be from birth throughout life. I think we have made a real misstep in that way. And then also making sure that our schools in our community get the resources that they need, because the majority of a $19 billion budget is in human services and education. And so both of those things touch public schools and mental health supports and so much more. So the connectivity is extremely important. And then making sure that families are really a part of the process so that we can allow educators and families together to rethink education, because we're likely not going back to where we were before. We can only move forward in more innovative ways.
Thank you. Ms. Alexander.
I don't have a question. I was just listening.
No problem.
I can ask something as a follow-up. I was just going to provide space for other people. So my follow-up question to your response, Faith, is there's a role that I think you're articulating around that of a convener, right? And I think sometimes prior to COVID, there were some unhealthy practices, I think, in both sectors, both in DCPS and charter schools, around sort of collaboration. I think we were forced to collaborate in a good way when there was a crisis. But I do find that people are sort of going back to their old ways and old habits, because that's kind of what happens in life when people don't feel the brunt of the crisis, or it doesn't feel like it did in 2020. So I think from my perspective, and my question to you is sort of like, do you see that role of convener and bringing together both sectors in order to sort of tackle some of these things and really making education a priority within the ward, especially since it has so many charter and DCPS schools in the ward?
Yeah. So I'll go back to my days with the Ward 5 Council on Education. And that was a time when I, along with many other neighbors together, we played the role of convener. In Ward 5 for a long time, and this was 2011, 2012, we were convening neighbors around, yes, we want these middle schools to open. We know that there are in education campuses, they're not working for our kids. They're not able to be prepared for the high schools that they're going to, whether they're going to their neighborhood school or whether they're going on to application school, right? But we had to convene neighbors to be able to do that. So convening and coalition building is just something that I think I naturally do. And also, we had to convene neighbors. I was 9 months pregnant. And as the president of the Ward 5 Council on Education, in 2013, November of 2013, because I was huge, I hosted the Ward 5 School Fair. And this was before My School DC. This was before Ed Fest, if we can even think that far back. But we convened at Dunbar High School. It was brand new and shiny. It was a beautiful building. All the schools in Ward 5 came. Charter, DCPS. We even had other programs that were like early learning cooperative programs. They were all there. We were all there in the Great Hall, like that opening area of Dunbar. And we were community. And people had to see all of the offerings. We didn't give anybody a map. You had to walk around. They were like, well, where is such and such school? I was like, I don't know. You got to walk around and see it. So that forced them to walk through and check out other schools that they would have never checked out. That also allowed other educators who are busy in their skill buildings to like look up and have the opportunity to connect with other people. In the Ward 5 Council on Education, we also brought school leaders together on a regular basis, not only to celebrate their wins, but also to make sure they can have conversation across schools. So for me, convening, being a convener, being a collaborator, being a coalition builder is the only way that we'll have the type of education that we deserve here in Ward 5, because all of our schools, whether there are challenges or great opportunities, great things are happening inside of those buildings. And it is on a council member to make sure that we are highlighting that. And I think sometimes so much of the focus and double down focus is really on DCPS, when we're not just saying, what do we need from our schools? What are families saying they need? How can we really provide that space to make sure that the choices that we are making around, people talk about mayoral control, or people talk about, what we should go back to, but really families want and communities want schools that work and schools that work together and that meet the needs of community. So as a council member, I would absolutely see myself as being a champion for all of our schools. Making sure that we do have matter of right schools, which are important, because some school options may not work for someone, or, we deserve those matter of right schools, but you have to be a champion for that, because that is one of the things that's at the core of a community is a school, is education. And so being a convener and bringing people together, and then being able to work on what do we need in the budget to make sure that Ward 5 is getting what we need. You get those conversations when you're doing these informal convenings, when you are able to be in relationship. And those kinds of things are really important to me.
And we have two audience questions. The first one is, what is your thinking? Oh, from Ms. Michelle Palmer, Executive Director of the Went Center for Loss and Healing. She says, hi, what is your thinking around violence reduction? What strategies do you think are important to begin addressing this issue?
Well, definitely mental health, access to mental health supports. I mean, I think that is a really big thing, and removing the stigma from that. And I'll just give a quick personal story, but at the beginning of the pandemic, trying to work, trying to have kids at home, my 2-year-old was running around like a terrorist. I was a terrible mom. I was like, if I yell one more time, I'm annoying myself. So I'm sure I'm annoying them. And I had to be able to step back and figure out what I needed to do in that situation. Not everyone has that opportunity to even step back in a moment because of the stressors. And so we do need access to mental health supports, and not just when you realize you're in the crisis, but long before that. So mental health is really important. But I often talk about violence reduction, and number one, just saying we are at the place we're at because we didn't invest and pour into communities and into individuals in the ways that we should have long ago. I'm so thankful for the work that I was able to do with Thrive by 5 DC, because I have been like in the pre-K through 12 space for so long. I need to zoom out from that. And in that work of early learning, working with young children and families, that is where we really need to make some big investments around making sure that families have all the things they need. Great access to housing, education, workforce, food access, transportation, quality childcare, rigorous childcare, high quality childcare. That's the word I was looking for. And that we're making sure that families truly can thrive. Because what we're seeing too is that like not focusing there, we're just seeing the manifestation of the lack of investment that we've had there in the past. So I think you have to look at really upstream ways, like working in the space around early learning and development, around prevention. Like that is really where prevention starts. Prevention also starts in working with our young people around exposure to careers, and not just having a summer youth employment program, but a year round. I mean, people want to make money. You want to understand the value of what you can bring to your household and feel like you're contributing. And so I think we do have to start doing career exposure and workforce opportunities for our young people. But also, I strongly believe in our violence interruption structure. And I think that we need to make sure that community knows it is happening, because we have violence interrupters who are doing really great work, but the community has no idea that that work is happening. So communities have to be connected to our violence interruption structure. And we have to make sure that there's the right type of information sharing, so that people who we have deemed at risk, we knew that a child could be at risk when they were probably in childcare, right? Because they didn't have all the things that they needed. So how can we make sure that we are able to wrap supports around our young people and families, bring them into the fold and make sure that their supports are what they need. And we have a lot of great community-based organizations that do that. So we have to fund that work appropriately, and not as an afterthought, or like to throw a lot of things there together. But we also need, just quite honestly, a police force that is at the right size to make sure that we can handle the federal things they have to handle when people want to come here and climb up the side of the Capitol, right? So January 6th, we need police for that. But we also need police who are parts of our community. So we need police who are equipped to be in our community and handle the variety of situations, because quite honestly, when people call 911, they expect someone to respond. And we do need the right types of people to respond. But right now, with the types of violence that we are experiencing, we need violence interrupters that can be rapid response to communities that don't have providers. And then we also need police who know our communities well enough and can come in and also promote healing. But if you commit a crime, there also has to be a consequence, not for you to go be locked away for the rest of your life, but for us to really work through together. What are the mental health supports they need? What are the other kinds of services and supports that people need in order to be able to come back to our community and be ready to contribute? And that also means when they come back to our community, that we have to have a community that is also ready for them, with jobs, with access to healthcare, with transportation, with making sure that if they need additional supports, that they're not seen as somebody that's excluded, but that they can be included. So we need a system that is focused on a lot of prevention and support on the front end. We have a lot of money to be able to do that, and to fund people who can do that, because sometimes government is not the best to do that. There are organizations that could do that much better, just like yours, the Went Center. And then we need to have interruption. Because we know that there are times when there are things going on in communities that can be mitigated by these violence interrupters. I know I call Cody Wynn. He's with NARC. I call him if something happens. I'm like, hey, Cody, I feel like something's going on. And he can work through that. But we also need, policing and courts that are also a part of thinking about restorative justice and bringing people back to our communities when the time is right. We have to have all those things work together in ways that are really important. And we need to tackle it kind of how we decided to tackle COVID. And I think if we focus on it, that is the kind of public health approach that I think is important, because you have to touch on all those aspects in order for us to move forward.
And Ms. Palmer says, thank you. And now I'm going to go to another Palmer, Erin Palmer. And then hopefully we'll have time for one more question before we wrap up. So Erin Palmer says, I am with one of my kids who wants to know more about the role of a ward council member.
I would say the role is plentiful. I think the most important thing about a ward council member is that you have to be a good neighbor, right? You have to know your neighbors, and not just the ones that are right outside of your door, but all throughout the ward. And in Ward 5, it is a big, big community. I mean, it's really vast. I was going somewhere earlier in Ward 5, and I left my house. I went down South Dakota to Bladensburg, then I went down to New York Avenue, and then I was back around North Capitol. And I was like, man, I'm still in Ward 5. So it's a very vast and different community, but the most important role of a ward council member is to be a good neighbor and to be present. I think you can only know what's happening in your community when you are present, and also when you hire staff that can extend your presence to places sometimes where you cannot be. While you are a legislator, so you come up with legislation and policy that can be passed, that's one aspect of the role. But I see another really important part of a council member's role is doing good constituent services. So for lack of a better term, being like a mini mayor in your community, right? You are connecting people to what new grants have come out for small businesses. How can you bring schools together, right, around certain things? If there's an issue of community violence, how can you bring, all the right parties to that neighborhood? If Ms. Johnson's trash didn't get picked up, being able to call and make sure that DPW is going to show up. If a neighbor is older and they're trying to navigate the process of trying to get their home renovated through the single family rehab program, you're walking them through that process, that you are their very best friend and helping them address whatever issue they have going on in their community, because it's our community. So constituent services is the most important role. But also when it comes to policymaking and legislation and the things that they vote on, making sure that we're not just moving frivolous legislation that the community can't feel. And even if it does seem frivolous, helping people see how important it is to them, so that they are a part of the process. So not just that things are getting passed at the Wilson building, which is our district building, but bringing it back to the community so that people can know, like I was on a call just before I joined you about rail safety. And the East-West Railway, a lot of it comes through Ward 5. It's important to have a piece of legislation that's about rail safety, because many of our communities sit next to a railroad. And so talking about why that's important to the community and why they should be a part of it. So again, I think the most important thing about a council member is not just the spotlight being on you, but making sure that the spotlight is on the community and what's most important to them, and that they are a partner with you in the work. And you only do that if you truly see someone as a neighbor and not just as a constituent.
Thank you. And Mr. Perry, do you have a quick question so that we can continue our tradition of ending on time?
Actually, I do not have any more questions.
Oh, awesome. Excellent. All right. So would love, based kind of on the questions you got, to kind of just, give your elevator wrap-up speech.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Khadijah, for inviting me, and Mr. Perry. It's wonderful to see you, and Joanna, always. I'm sure we'll see each other even after this. But it has truly been a pleasure to be able to join you in this conversation and just to share more, of who I am and why I'm running. I am running to be the next Ward 5 council member because I do believe in the power of our community. I think that centering our community is our only way forward. We have a city that has become a city of haves and have-nots, and that's not okay. None of us should be okay with that. And we should not live in a ward in a city that is so resource rich and people feel like it's out of touch, out of reach for them. It's not okay. I want to continue to raise my children in a community that can be diverse, with both people who are new to the community and people just like Miss Atkins, who I told you I met on the first day we rolled up here to the 3200 block of Walnut Street Northeast. But all of us can be here together in this community, in our ward, and I believe in that. And I know that it's possible because I know what government can do. And I know what government should be doing for our community. I am the only person in the race that actually knows that. I've really completed things and been able to work on a variety of different spaces within government, both within our community, as grassroots work with the Ward 5 Council on Education, but also in an independent agency where we literally had to fight for every single dime that we had to do the work with families in the State Board of Education. And I have also had to rework a complete budget for my office in the midst of COVID when I was in the mayor's cabinet to make sure that no one lost jobs, and also to make sure that neighbors got the high quality services that they deserved. No one else has done that. Some people have done something over here and something over there, but I have had a continuum of experience that our community deserves. And so I know that as we move forward in this race, that I am the best. I am the most prepared, as women usually are. I am ready for the job. I am qualified, and I'm not afraid to say that. I think when people, again, throw bombs, you have to look deeper at what they cannot provide. And also, if they cannot provide it, we know that our community deserves better. And I look forward to serving our community as I already have, not only as a neighbor, but also in understanding how our government can work to the benefit of our community, that the $19 billion that is in this current budget to come forth will work on behalf of our communities because we deserve it. So it shouldn't matter if you live in Brookland, or if you live in Carver Terrace, or if you live in Trinidad, or if you live in Hanover and Bates. All of us should have what we need. And it is up to all of us to make sure that we can do that. But I am running because I know that all of us have these amazing ideas, and that the power of our community will move us forward into a war that can be reflective of us all. I can also say that I am probably one of the most invested people in this race. I am raising my children here, and this is our home. And so I look forward to continuing to be connected with each of you. And I hope that this conversation has helped you learn more about me, but you can also go onto my website at faithforward5dc.org. And you can send me an email at contact@faithforward5dc.org. Don't be surprised if I respond. I'm always the one who responds. My campaign manager hates that. But again, I like being connected with people and being able to talk to them. So I look forward to staying connected with you. And I also ask for your vote on June 21st.
Thank you so much, Faith. Thank you so much, Mr. Perry, Miss Joanna Smith, Miss Alexander, and our attendees for attending this community conversation. And now we're going to say goodbye.